New York City, a place where lives can change in a single moment. This is the story of a young mechanic, a billionaire father, and his 17-year-old daughter bound to a wheelchair. What happens when kindness speaks louder than wealth? Stay with us to find out. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. In New York City, life moved fast. Taxis honked, people rushed, and skyscrapers cast long shadows over the busy streets. Among this chaos, 17-year-old Emily Thompson felt unusually small. Despite being the daughter of Richard Thompson, a billionaire known for his influence and empire, she often felt invisible when trapped in her wheelchair. That afternoon, while enjoying a rare moment of freedom at a community park, her wheelchair suddenly gave out. A mechanical snap, followed by the stubborn refusal of the wheels to move, left her stranded. Panic rushed through her as she realized she couldn't move an inch. Emily looked around, hoping someone might notice her distress. Dozens of strangers walked past, their eyes glued to phones or lost in their own world. Nobody slowed down, not even when they noticed the broken wheelchair. Emily's face flushed with embarrassment. She hated moments like this, moments that reminded her how dependent she was on others. For someone who longed for independence, every second felt like a cruel punishment. She clenched her fists tightly, fighting back tears, silently wishing she wasn't born into a body that needed wheels to move. Her father's sleek black limousine waited just across the park entrance. Richard Thompson, a man of sharp suits and sharper decisions, sat inside, scrolling through his phone. He trusted his staff to handle everything, and he assumed someone would take care of his daughter's sudden trouble. But when Emily turned her eyes toward the car, she noticed no one was coming. Not the chauffeur, not the assistants, not even her father. For a brief, painful moment, she realized she was utterly alone. The thought stung more than the broken chair. Then out of the corner of her eye, Emily spotted a young man walking out of a nearby garage. His clothes were worn, his hands dark with grease, but his stride carried confidence. His name was Jake, a 21-year-old mechanic whose life was far from easy. Jake had grown up fixing cars and bikes and now worked long hours to support his younger siblings. He was used to seeing people ignore those in need, but something about the sight of Emily struggling struck a chord deep inside him. Unlike the others, he couldn't just walk away. Jake approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey, looks like you could use a little help," he said, his tone light yet sincere. Emily's heart skipped. She wasn't used to strangers speaking to her without pity or judgment. Most either avoided eye contact or treated her like she was fragile glass. This boy, however, spoke as though she was just another person, someone worth helping, not pitying. She hesitated, unsure if she should let him near, but then she caught the warmth in his eyes. Against her usual instinct, she nodded softly. Kneeling beside the wheelchair, Jake inspected the damage. His hands moved with practiced precision as he touched the wheels and the frame, testing their resistance. "It's not too bad," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Emily leaned forward slightly, curiosity flickering across her face. She could tell this wasn't the first time he had fixed something broken. There was confidence in the way he handled each piece, as though he understood the language of machines better than most people. Understood words. For the first time in days, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. Inside the limousine, Richard noticed the scene. He narrowed his eyes, watching closely as his daughter spoke to a stranger. Richard was a man who trusted very few, and almost never the working-class people who lived a life far removed from his wealth. Yet something about Jake's posture struck him. This was no ordinary passerby. This was someone who genuinely cared. Richard, though skeptical, didn't step out. He simply observed. his curiosity mounting with every second. For a man who believed money solved everything, it was strange to watch kindness solve a problem his fortune couldn't. Emily studied Jake quietly as he worked. His hair fell slightly into his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. There was no arrogance in him, no sign that he was helping her for recognition. He simply wanted to fix what was broken. She found herself unexpectedly fascinated by his determination. In her world of luxury, she rarely met people who did things without expecting something in return. Jake, however, seemed cut from a different cloth, one stitched with humility, skill, and heart. A wave of gratitude washed over her, though she remained silent. Minutes passed, and Jake continued his careful inspection. He adjusted bolts, checked the alignment, and tested the wheels with gentle precision. Emily could hear the faint scrape of tools from his pocket as he used whatever he had available. Each sound was oddly comforting, like the rhythm of hope being pieced back together. She glanced toward her father's car again, half expecting him to interrupt. But still, the tinted windows remained closed. It was just her and this mechanic, two different worlds colliding in a moment that already felt unforgettable. Jake finally looked up, offering a reassuring smile. "I think I can fix this, but it'll take a few minutes," he said. Emily nodded. Quickly, her voice catching as she replied, "Thank you, really." It wasn't just gratitude for the repair, it was gratitude for being seen, for being treated like a person rather than a burden. For the first time that day, her embarrassment eased, replaced by a quiet sense of trust. Jake didn't know it, but his simple gesture was mending more than a wheelchair. It was mending a heart weighed down by years of silent frustration. As Jake continued, the crowd moved on around them. Strangers barely noticed the scene, but Emily's world had slowed. Each turn of his wrist, each movement of his hands felt like proof that kindness still existed. She thought about all the time she felt overlooked, even in her own family, and how this simple act from a stranger now meant more than any gift her father's wealth had ever bought her. In that moment, she realized that sometimes the people with the least resources had the most to give. Richard finally lowered his phone, his eyes fixed on Jake's hands, moving with such care. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, something rare for a man hardened by business and power. Was it admiration? Was it shame? He couldn't quite name it, but one thing was certain. The young mechanic was accomplishing what all his money and staff could not. Watching his daughter's face light up with cautious hope, Richard felt a pang of realization. Maybe, just maybe, he had overlooked the simplest truth of all human connection mattered more than wealth. Emily's heart thudded as she studied the mechanic crouched beside her. She didn't even know his last name, yet she already felt a sense of safety around him. For years, she believed people saw only her wheelchair, but Jake looked past it straight into the person she was inside. That tiny shift, that spark of recognition, was enough to stir something long dormant within her confidence. Maybe she wasn't as invisible as she thought. Maybe someone could see her not as broken, but as whole. When Jake finally tightened the last bolt, he glanced up at Emily with a boyish grin. "Almost done. You'll be moving again in no time," he said. Emily couldn't stop the small smile tugging at her lips. For once, she didn't feel trapped. Instead, she felt cared for. She didn't know where this moment would lead, but deep down, she sensed it was the beginning of something far bigger than a simple repair. Jake rolled up his sleeves, determination flashing in his eyes as he pulled a small toolkit from his backpack. Most people carried snacks, books, or laptops. Jake carried tools. It was all he needed to make the world a little better, one repair at a time. He spread out wrenches, screwdrivers, and a few spare parts he had collected over the years. Emily watched quietly, her curiosity growing. She had never seen anyone so focused on her wheelchair before. To her, it was just an object of necessity. To him, it was a machine with potential. As Jake tightened bolts and realigned the wheels, he explained in simple terms what he was doing. "See this bearing? It's worn. Down, that's why it gets stuck. I'll swap it with a smoother one." His voice was calm, filled with quiet confidence. Emily leaned forward, her usual shyness fading. For the first time in years, someone treated her wheelchair like it mattered. She wasn't just a girl with a disability, she was someone worth effort, patience, and care. Emily's father, Richard, observed through the tinted car window. He had paid for the best hospitals, the most advanced devices, and countless specialists, yet none had offered the kind of passion this mechanic displayed. Richard's wealth had built empires, but here was a young man with grease on his hands, creating something. Money alone couldn't buy comfort mixed with dignity. Richard's chest tightened with emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel. He wasn't sure if it was admiration or shame, but he couldn't look away. Meanwhile, Emily's heart raced. Jake's hands moved with grace, each adjustment small but significant. He wrapped padded material around the handles, explaining, "This will make it softer for your hands." He adjusted the seat angle, tilting it slightly for posture support. Emily's eyes widened when he placed a thin layer of cushion on the sides for added comfort. These weren't repairs, they were thoughtful modifications. It felt like he wasn't just fixing a chair. He was building her independence, piece by piece, with every touch of his skilled hands. Emily tested the new grips by resting her hands on them. "Wow," she whispered, surprised at the comfort. She couldn't remember the last time she sat in her wheelchair without feeling sore or uncomfortable. Jake gave a small grin, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sometimes it's not about expensive tech, it's about making it work for you." Emily looked at him, her chest tightening with gratitude. In that single moment, she realized how rare it was to meet someone who didn't just see the machine, but also cared for the person who relied on it. Jake continued working, swapping out screws with better ones he had saved from other jobs. His dedication impressed Emily deeply. She found herself studying his face, the sharp jawline, the streaks of oil, smudged across his cheek, the unwavering concentration. He didn't glance at his phone, didn't get distracted, and didn't act like this was a burden. Every movement told her he truly wanted to help. A strange warmth grew inside her chest. For the first time, she felt seen, not for her father's money, not for her disability, but for herself. Richard finally stepped out of his limousine. His polished shoes touched the ground softly, and the crowd parted instinctively at the sight of the billionaire. He walked closer, his expression unreadable as Jake kept working. Emily glanced nervously at her father, unsure how he would react to a mechanic touching her wheelchair. But Richard stayed silent, watching intently. His eyes followed Jake's hands as they transformed the chair into something better than before. For a man who believed in buying perfection, he was witnessing perfection created through care. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she tested the new movement of the wheels. They glided smoothly, responding with ease to her touch. "It's so light," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Jake chuckled softly. "That's how it should feel. It should move with you, not against you." Emily's eyes sparkled as she pushed forward. Effortlessly, it felt like freedom, like breaking out of invisible chains that had held her back for years. For the first time in a long while, she felt powerful instead of powerless. Richard's throat tightened as he saw his daughter's face brighten with joy. He had gifted her cars, designer clothes, and even private tutors, but none of those things had put that look on her face. A single young mechanic with nothing but simple tools had done what billions couldn't. Richard swallowed hard, his eyes moist. It hit him that money had limits. No matter how much he spent, money couldn't manufacture sincerity, care, or compassion. He was witnessing proof of it in front of his eyes. Jake knelt down again to check the alignment one last time. "I've adjusted the angle so your back won't hurt as much when you sit for long periods," he said softly. Emily blinked in disbelief. You thought about that too? Jake smiled, warmly. Of course, machines should serve people, not make life harder. Emily bit her lip, struggling to hold back tears. She had lived in a world where everything about her felt inconvenient, her wheelchair, her body, even her place in her father's empire. But here was someone who made her feel the opposite. The crowd around them had grown. A few passers-by stopped to watch, whispering to one another about the unusual sight, a billionaire's daughter being helped by an ordinary mechanic. Cameras clicked, but neither Jake nor Emily seemed to notice. For them, the world had shrunk to just the chair, the tools, and the moment. Emily's heart pounded with nervous energy, realizing how rare this was. People usually saw her as untouchable, someone shielded by wealth. Now, for the first time, someone crossed that barrier simply because they cared. Jake finally wiped his hands on a rag, exhaling deeply. All set, he said. Emily gripped the wheels and pushed herself forward. The chair moved like it was brand new, but better, stronger, smoother, more alive. She gasped in awe, laughter spilling out as she turned the chair easily. The sound of her joy made Jake grin and caused Richard's chest to ache with an unfamiliar mix of pride and humility. Emily spun around once, giggling like she hadn't in years. Her freedom had been restored, and it felt glorious. Emily turned to Jake, her eyes glistening. This doesn't feel like my old chair anymore. It feels like it was made just for me. Jake shrugged modestly, though his heart swelled. That's the idea, he said. Richard finally stepped closer, his voice softer than Emily had ever heard it. Young man, I don't know how to thank you. I've spent fortunes, but I've never seen my daughter smile like this. Jake looked up at the billionaire, wiping sweat from his forehead. Sometimes it's not about money, sir. Sometimes it's about heart. Emily looked between the two men, her powerful father and the humble mechanic, and realized something profound. In her father's world, everything was measured by status and wealth. But in this moment, standing beside Jake, she understood that the truest wealth came from compassion. Her heart pounded with gratitude, her smile brighter than the city lights. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel trapped by her circumstances. She felt free, strong, and hopeful, all because someone cared enough to fix more than just a wheelchair. Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she gripped the wheelchair's smooth new rims. With a cautious push, the chair glided forward like never before. It was effortless, natural, almost like the world had suddenly opened up for her. She gasped softly, the sound carrying the weight of years of frustration suddenly lifted. Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering against the glow of the afternoon sun. Turning toward Jake, her voice cracked as she whispered, I've never felt this free in years. Thank you. The words came out fragile, yet they carried a power that left Jake momentarily speechless. Jake's heart tightened at her gratitude. He wasn't used to being thanked for his work. Most of his customers barely noticed the effort he poured into repairs. But this was different. He wasn't just fixing a machine. He had restored a piece of someone's life. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly, cheeks flushed, unsure how to respond. You don't have to thank me, he finally muttered, but his eyes betrayed the pride swelling within him. This was a moment he would never forget. Richard, who had spent his life building skyscrapers and companies, finally stepped forward. For once, his powerful presence didn't come from authority or money. It came from vulnerability. His face, usually sharp and unreadable, was softened by emotion. Each step toward Jake felt heavy, as though the billionaire carried the weight of years spent believing that wealth was the answer to everything. Standing before Jake, Richard extended his hand, his voice unsteady. Son, he said slowly, you've given my daughter something I couldn't buy with all my money, hope. The words hung in the air, silencing the crowd that had gathered around. Jake blinked, stunned. He had never been called son by someone like Richard Thompson, a man known for his coldness and distance. Slowly, he reached out and shook the billionaire's hand. His grip was firm, but his humility was stronger. "Sir," Jake replied quietly, "sometimes the smallest fixes can make the biggest difference." His words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply with everyone within earshot. For a fleeting moment, the busy city seemed to pause, letting kindness take center stage. The crowd erupted into applause. Strangers who had been hurrying by moments earlier now stopped to witness the rare sight of raw humanity breaking barriers of wealth and class. Some recorded the moment on their phones, while others wiped tears from their eyes. A few parents whispered to their children, pointing at Jake as though he were a living lesson in compassion. In the middle of New York City, where steel and glass often overshadowed hearts, something extraordinary had unfolded, a reminder that empathy could still shine through the noise. Emily's smile was radiant, brighter than the sunlight filtering through the skyscrapers. For years, she had carried the invisible weight of being defined by her wheelchair, her disability, and her father's shadow. But now she felt seen as herself, a young woman with dreams, strength, and hope. Her laughter rang out as she spun the chair gracefully, the smooth wheels gliding without resistance. Each turn felt like reclaiming a part of her identity that had long been buried. She looked at Jake with gratitude that words could never fully capture. Richard stood silently, watching his daughter glow with joy. He felt a lump rise in his throat, his vision blurring with tears he rarely allowed to fall. For decades, he had believed success meant control and possession, but at that moment, success meant something else. Seeing his daughter happy because of a stranger's kindness, it humbled him in ways business never could. He realized that despite all his billions, he had overlooked the most important currency of all, human compassion. His gratitude toward Jake wasn't just for fixing the chair, but for reminding him of life's true value. Jake stepped back, letting Emily roll freely in her chair. He didn't want to take the spotlight, but Emily refused to let him fade into the background. She turned to the crowd and raised her voice. "This man didn't just fix my wheelchair, he gave me freedom again." Her words stirred the onlookers, who clapped louder, their cheers echoing across the park. Jake lowered his head modestly, but his chest swelled with pride. For someone who had always been overlooked, being recognized for his kindness felt surreal. He had never imagined his work could touch so many lives. A small boy tugged on his mother's hand, pointing at Jake. "Mom, I want to be like him when I grow up," the child said. The mother smiled, nodding. "Then remember this moment, sweetheart. Kindness is the greatest strength." Jake overheard and felt his eyes sting with emotion. He never wanted fame, but the thought of inspiring even one child filled him with a sense of purpose. In a world obsessed with wealth and power, he had proven that compassion still mattered and that it could ripple outward, touching hearts he'd never meet. Richard placed a hand gently on Emily's shoulder, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You're right, Emily," he said, his voice breaking. "This young man has given us both something priceless." He turned back to Jake, his eyes shining. "I don't know what your dreams are, but I want to help you achieve them." The offer was sincere, but Jake shook his head politely. "Sir, I don't need much. Just knowing she's happy is enough." That answer, humble yet powerful, left Richard speechless. For once, the billionaire had no words, only respect. Emily looked at Jake, her heart pounding. She wanted to say more, to express the gratitude swelling inside her chest, but all she managed was a tearful smile, one that spoke volumes. In that smile was the unspoken truth that she would never forget this moment, or the young mechanic who changed her life with nothing more than tools, skill, and heart. Jake nodded at her gently, as if to say he understood. Sometimes the strongest connections needed no words. They lived in shared silences and unspoken gratitude. As the sun dipped lower, painting the city in golden hues, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the impact of what they had witnessed lingered in the air. People carried the story with them of a billionaire, Humbled, a daughter freed, and a mechanic who became a hero without meaning to. News of the moment spread quickly through social media, photos and videos going viral within hours. Yet for Jake, the greatest reward wasn't recognition. It was the memory of Emily's smile, etched forever in his heart. That was worth more than all the praise the world could offer. Richard stood still, lost in thought, as Emily continued rolling with newfound ease. He looked at Jake one last time and said, softly, "Thank you, son. Today you reminded me of what truly matters." Jake nodded respectfully, tucking his tools back into his backpack. He walked away quietly, blending back into the rhythm of the city, leaving behind a moment that would live forever in the hearts of those who witnessed it. That day, a billionaire learned the value of kindness, a daughter regained her confidence, and a young mechanic unknowingly became their hero.